St. Lucia to pay that price.
But what gives the impression that the tribalism will end when, for example, you have all those memes on social media of the current prime minister, and before you were subjected to the same level of ridicule?
I didn't say it was going to end. I just said what was something we should aspire for. But I do admit, in practical terms, once you have an opposition that's prepared, wants to get into office, they are going to do whatever they think is necessary to do that. The discernment really comes among the media, in terms that the media, the old media, that the real experienced media, are persons that know that it's not for them to express their opinions. And that's the difference between a talk show and a news. So news is supposed to present the facts from different perspectives and allow people to make the decision for themselves. It shouldn't be your job to formulate an opinion for somebody. But what you want to do is sometimes is take an adversarial position in order to bring the most out from the interview, and there's more information that's coming out that people can make that decision. Sadly, many people still believe the written word is the gospel. So when they see something in social media, it doesn't go through the same level of scrutiny that it would do on your show. So when you sit down to do a news item, I'm sure you have people who read it over and say, do we really want to go with this? Can we determine the veracity of any of this information? Stuff on social media is not censored in any way. And sadly, some people take it literally. And when people then now hear a narrative continually and with the expectation that we're supposed to respond. Now, if I had to respond to everything that was being said, I'd be spending less time governing the country and more time trying to respond. So these are the difficult things. These are some of the challenges that we all have. Politicians around the world are confronting the same thing. Some politicians have been able to overcome them and become reelected. Some politicians like myself did not. And those are things that we need to keep adapting with people, understanding how they're thinking, what their priorities are, and to make sure that whatever policies we're doing, however we're implementing our programs, it's certainly in keeping with the support of the general public.
How do you expect to serve as leader of the opposition? You expect to be confrontational? Are you expecting to be as au fait with the issues as possible, and also to try to deal with them without being emotional or trying to gain political mileage out of this? Because considering that your party was humiliated at the polls, I'm sure that you will go into every sitting of the House of Assembly literally wanting to fight for your political life, considering you have only 2 seats in the opposition.
And maybe that's how some other people would react. That's not how I would react. I mean, at the end of the day, we were humiliated if you measure the impact in the parliament, 15-2. And then you have so-called 2 independents, which we've not seen any evidence of. They call themselves independent, but the evidence is quite the contrary. But when you analyze the elections, only 51% of the people voted. And this is why we were pointing out in the parliament this last session. The Labour Party, when you measure it based on the number of people who were eligible to vote, only got 27% of the vote. United Workers' Party got 24 or 23%. So it means that 63% of the voting population either did not vote for the Labour Party or did not vote. Now, you can say I'm 15-2 and I have this massive majority, which certainly from a legislative perspective and an executive perspective, that's absolutely true. But if you are overconfident, like what I saw yesterday in the House, and you believe you can do anything and you have the mandate to do anything, be forewarned. Because we've seen it in the past in this country, in which a government came into office with the same level of arrogance and confidence, did not deliver, and the people turned very quickly. And I think we were trying to point that out to the Labour Party, that the first 100 days is not anything to be proud of. Okay, you put together some fancy magazine with some pictures, and a lot of the things, we certainly can read through it, were a lot of things that we had started that were already in train, and I'm not saying that to score cheap political points, but that's a fact. So when you sit there, like a big one really was the announcement by the U.S. Of the farm workers being able to come now to work in the States. There's no way the government would have come into office and in the first 100 days been able to put something like that. That takes a fairly long time to negotiate.
But having lost by a little over 6,000 votes in the last general election. Would you support, for example, under the Ghana system, having proportional representation compared to what we have now, first past the post? And I know opposition political parties, whenever they lose, then they change their positions on certain things, the system to suit them. But under the proportional representation system, the United Workers' Party would have gotten more seats than just 2.
There's no perfect system, right? So there's always going to be a time you're going to look at the results and you'll say, what if? I think that in terms of reform, that's not my priority, or would not be my priority. My priority is that in modern Western democracies, it is on the theory that you have 3 seats of power: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And those 3 seats of power are supposed to be separated. So in our parliamentary system, in a small island state like St. Lucia, there is no difference between the executive and the legislature. 0. So think of it. How many of the persons who are in the cabinet are also MPs? So how do you vote for something in cabinet and then go argue against it when you're in Parliament? Doesn't going to happen, right? I think that the judiciary has not amended its ways or changed its ways to understand that there's no difference between the executive and the legislature. So let me explain to what I mean by that. If you do have a separation of power between the executive and the legislature, so between cabinet and parliament, it means that there would have been a certain level of accountable scrutiny that would have taken place for the bill to be passed, right? So you can't be as a cocksured as a cabinet that whatever you send over, that is just going to be accepted. There's no fear when you are in cabinet that anything you send, unless there's a really bad error in it, that it's not going to pass, okay? So if that level of scrutiny is not taking place, then it falls on the judiciary to be much more demanding for better written laws. And I think that the judiciary needs to understand that they are the final line of defense for the people.
But are they working with the laws that they're handed?
They are, but when the laws are not well written, are vague.
It's not their fault?
No, but they can rule that to force the legislators to clean it up. So let's take a very good one is boundary reform, right? How is it that the OECS in particular, St. Lucia, have not gone through the same level of reform that most parliamentarian governments have gone through? This idea that a boundary is done by a committee which is chaired by the Speaker of the House, who is a bipartisan, not a bipartisan, is a partisan person, okay? Most other countries in the world, your boundaries are done tied to your census. So immediately after a census, within 1 year, you're supposed to reform your boundaries, and the boundaries are done by an independent entity. In our system, it's being done by a boundaries commission in which both the opposition and the government appoint people. Now, we confuse the appointment as being representatives of the Labour Party and representatives of the United Workers' Party. They're not our representatives. We're simply given the opportunity to appoint to make sure that nobody is overwhelming at that level. So what I'm saying to you is that here we have case after case that's come to the forefront of the courts, and the court's ruling, in essence, has not reprimanded governments for the informality of our boundaries. And so by their rulings, automatically forces governments to reform and tighten up their legislation, because somebody has to be protecting the people. And so that requires a tremendous amount of maturity. And then the fear is that a lot of persons who are being appointed to the judiciary have to get the approval of the same politicians, right? So it is a fallacy in this part of the world that there is a separation between the executive, the legislator, and the judiciary. And I think, honestly, Tim, if we're going to have reform, that is the part that needs to be reformed the most. So the question becomes, should the leader of the country be elected on their own merit? So instead of being a representative, that you have an election as to who you want as the prime minister of your country, and the prime minister then selects people who are not actually part of the legislature to be part of their cabinet. And so now all of a sudden you have a complete separation. It's much more similar to the American system. So what the legislator is going to do is they have to approve the budgets, vet all the policies, and approve any of the new laws that are coming in. But they should not necessarily be tied to party.
But those recommendations normally come from the leader of the opposition. That's after you have lost a general election. Because you were prime minister for 5 years, and you never led on this particular issue.
So I did not have 2/3 majority. The first thing that we wanted to do was, we've not had any major constitutional changes in the 42, 43 years since independence. And so we did cause Kimson Rose, when I came into government, she was given a contract to be the Attorney General for another 1.5 years during my administration. So I mean, this is insane. How does an outgoing government get to select the Attorney General who actually is in the cabinet? And so we finally were able to negotiate with her and got her to take on a different position, which was constitutional reform. And we actually brought down Joe Clark. I don't know if you remember Joe Clark, the former Prime Minister of Canada, and made an attempt to bring both parties together. We also had a former Prime Minister of Malta as part of the crew to at least let's deal with boundaries reforms, because our boundaries are badly out of portion. Grosley is at 26,000, Dennery South is at 6,000 or 5,000. Okay, they're supposed to be the same number, and so that's how badly aligned our boundaries are. So if you take it from within 20% of each other, the smallest constituency is supposed to be 6,500. The largest constituency is supposed to be 9,500. So that kind of gives you an idea of how bad this is. And we could not get consensus. And certainly when you only have 11 seats, you're going to need the opposition to make that happen. So now this is the third time that the Labour Party would have had more than a 2/3 majority. They've squandered the first two opportunities to actually have any kind of substantial constitutional reform. Sadly, they're in a position where they don't even have to consult the opposition to whatever reforms they want. We saw yesterday they were dissatisfied with how the technocrats were managing the economic fund and decided, okay, well, we're going to go and change the law so you don't have the say anymore. Now, when you have a group of people that are going to take on that kind of attitude and are going to use the majority that they have to just basically bypass anyone who's complaining. So even I'm trying to get up to speak, and the Prime Minister is threatening me, telling me if I speak and say these things about the economic fund, that he's going to bring up things in our past, and we're going to be here till midnight. Now, if you have a Prime Minister that is prepared to go to that extent in public against the leader of the opposition, what happens behind doors? What happens to people who may not have the ability that I did to stand on my own feet and resist it? But that tells you the kind of temperament of and the arrogance of this government and what they're doing. And this is why we wanted to remind them that we know, realistically, all we would be hopeful is that they would listen to what we have to say in the House and take some of the things into consideration. But the real opportunity to keep this government under pressure is going to be in the People's Parliament.
How long do you expect to remain as the MP for Mico South?
For the 5 years.
No doubt about that.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
And how long are you going to serve as the leader of the opposition?
The party has to make that decision.
And also as political leader of the Unitedpac Party.
The party makes that decision.
Next time around, are you interested? For example, if you have the delegates conference later this year or into next year, so will you be contesting the leadership of the Unitedpac Party?
So one of the things, I'm not hungry for power. Okay, I would like to know that if I'm getting the support of persons, it's because they think that I have the merit of doing it, I have the capacity to be able to lead. Once we have gotten the report and we are all able to digest the report, I may have been the cause of the loss of the election. I don't know. Okay, and if I, in fact, the cause of the loss of the election, we have to ask the question: can that be remedied? Can, I don't want to say repackage, but can we change certain things, communicate differently in order for me to maintain the position as the political leader? And the report will hopefully give us some insight into that. And whatever the report comes out with, and whatever the decisions are made afterwards, I support the United Workers' Party. I don't need to be the political leader to be able to support them. Okay, so I am here for the long run. I believe in the values of our party. I believe in the history of our party. I believe that politics is an important aspect of nation building. And I'm not one of those who will ever be able to sit on the sideline, criticize, and not get involved.
The report might make reference, I'm just playing clairvoyant there. The report might make reference to the move that was pulled on you by Mr. Stevenson King. Do you believe that you underestimated Mr. King?
What do you mean by underestimate?
In terms of his political acumen, in terms of his ability to outsmart you?
I would say to you that if Steve wanted to leave, that is his prerogative. And I would have zero difficulty with that. Okay? That's his choice. So there were a couple of things about how he executed what he did that brings into question a lot of things. So ultimately, it appears to be revenge. Because how do you sit in a cabinet for 5 years, draw a salary, say nothing? You were given the biggest ministry. You were treated as a senior minister with the greatest amount of respect. When I was in Parliament, you sat at my right-hand side. In Cabinet, you sat at my left-hand side. A day before I was making the decision to call the election, which was on a Sunday, I called the election on a Monday. I met with Steve. I had heard he had some issues. He brought up some of the issues. None of those issues were insurmountable, that could not be resolved. I thought we had a very good understanding. In fact, we did a TV show that same night, right? So here it is that he had an opportunity to express his disappointment or his concerns with me, with the party. He didn't. There was a vote of no confidence, which I believe that the Labour Party said there were people on my side that were going to support it. I think that he was one of them. He chose not to say anything. And the greatest disappointment is not the decision to leave. It's what he said. That he went on talk shows after talk shows and demeaned the characters of the people in the United Workers' Party. Made all kinds of allegations and aspersions against people in the United Workers' Party. And it's sad because I think that as time goes by, Tim, that people are going to see that he actually was demeaning himself. So let's examine two cases in point. So Richard Fedrick had made the allegation that Guy Joseph had offered a bribe to Stevenson King. You heard that. Steve never came out and said yes or no, but all of a sudden when he went on the talk shows, he said yes. So let's look at that. So when Guy apparently made this offer to Steve, Steve was the Prime Minister. But more importantly, he was also the Minister of Finance. So we now know that he did not fire Guy. Is that correct? But also, if in fact Guy approached him to offer him a bribe in order to support a project with A&M for the airport redevelopment, as the Minister of Finance, SLASPA needs your approval as the Minister of Finance to proceed with the contract. Why didn't he at least minimum say to SLASPA, let's not go in that direction? Now, if he had done that, there would be some more credibility to what he said. So it's very difficult for me to accept what he was saying, and certainly when we'd had discussions with him, he denied that there was any bribe at the time. So I don't know how to measure that in my mind. The second one, which is even more interesting, is in the House yesterday. He made all kinds of allegations about road projects between Fresh Start and Nationwide, and indicated that his ministry was not in control because it was not reporting to the chief engineer, it was reporting to the permanent secretary. And the permanent secretary did not have the capacity to do the analysis himself. So let's look at that. So what, the PS has any more capacity, really, to determine if the chief engineer is giving him the right information? Is this the first time where a special unit was put into the Ministry of Infrastructure to report to the PS. And why is it important to report to the PS? Because the PS in any ministry is the chief accounting officer. That's the person has one. But the PS that we're speaking about actually used to be the deputy chief engineer. So it's not to say that the PS is completely out of place. Now, the reason why in our system we call a permanent secretary is because the position is constitutionally protected. Because if you're going to be the chief accounting officer, you have to not fear making any tough decisions. It means that we can't fire you, nobody can come after you, and your say is final. I don't remember receiving any information, there's certainly no documents on record of which the PS created a complaint or was concerned about how the projects were going. When we take the Rodney Bay Road as a classic example, for Steve to sit in the parliament and to listen to somebody to make the allegation that somehow I caused the roundabout to change or to be put by Il Parata, or where the swimming pool is, the aquatic center, in order for us to acquire land from my father. Okay, let's examine that. So the amount of land that was taken from my father's portion of land in that area was 400 square feet, of which my father gave it to them. So in fact, my father would be better off if they didn't do it there, right? The person whose land that we acquired the most of was a guy called Brian Daher, and we were simply going to exchange the land for land in the south because he's doing much more development in the south. The person who made the recommendation for us to move to that roundabout was the chief engineer. And because why? Because the design of the north-south highway, La Charrette Road, is intended to be a major artery to connect to it. So it made sense to put the roundabout in that location, of which it was. So to stand in the House, make allegations that there's investigation of all things that are the responsibility of the PS and the ministry, and the project fell under his ministry, what he is doing is indicting himself. The same way in saying that Guy Joseph bribed him, right? He's indicting himself, because the question becomes, what did you do? Now, in the heat of an election, when that information comes out, it was difficult for people to rationalize. And the result of it, I think, was a lot of people stayed away. People were confused, they didn't know what to believe, they were hearing all these allegations. Steve comes out and says this thing, but at the same time, Steve was trying to convince everybody that he's an independent. Okay? We now know that's farcical. Farcical. So the question is that did Steve blindside me? I would say yes. Did I look in the body language very frequently and say I don't think that he's a very comfortable person? I would say yes. But I never thought that Steve would have gone to this direction in doing what he did. It smells of vindictiveness and really very emotional. And the Steve I saw in the House yesterday, that is what struck a chord with me. I wish Steve well. If he wants to go in this direction, he's certainly a seasoned enough politician. And by all means, if he thinks that that's a better way to represent the people from his constituency, do so. But stop treating the populace of this country as fools. Everybody can see, despite you talking about the blue wave and everything else and the Patriot, that you cut a deal with the Labour Party. You're in their ministry. It's amazing to me that he's now sitting way on the other side of the Parliament. It's all very, very, very odd. And then this relationship he has with Richard, where he distanced himself, and that was really, the Richard issue was the biggest issue in many ways why Steve was replaced as the political leader of the United Workers' Party. Because even after the election, in which the evidence was clear that Richard impacted us, Steve was refusing to make the change. Now, it's amazing to me that the strategy of the Labour Party to portray Steve and Richard as independent candidates, not to contest the seat, and now to put them into their cabinet. I mean, the evidence suggests everything but independence. You know, and in the case of Richard, wow. You know, when the Labour Party first heard about him losing his visa, what did they say? That he needs to be removed as a minister. and they paraded and campaigned on that issue. What's changed in the 11 years?
But isn't it safe to say that he's worthy of credit? That kind of comeback when he was written off after the 2011 general election. One never anticipated that he would have won in 2021 and returned to any government, whether it's the SLP or UWP government, far less an administration that's being led by Philip J. Pierre. That it deserves some kind of credit.
Absolutely. And I think that a large part was COVID and people wanting change. So it was more, was it a supportive vote of Richard? So when you look at the voting turnout in Castries Central, it's one of the lowest. So it's not to say that Richard won with this overwhelming mandate. He won with a clear majority, but certainly not the majority of people in the area.
But it also says something about the incumbent, Mrs. Sarah Flood-Bober.
I'm sure. Yeah. All of us, I mean, we all have to be accountable for what has transpired. But it doesn't change the fact that you can't say one thing yesterday. Do not give a reason and say something completely different. So if in fact you felt that Richard, because he didn't have a U.S. visa, should not hold a cabinet post, what do we know in 11 years? Did he get the visa back? The answer is no. We now saw the letter that his daughter had written to the U.S. authorities asking them to reinstate his visas. The response from the authorities said why he lost his visa, which is very damning, but more importantly said that it's a permanent revocation. Now, if in fact that the Labour Party is going to ignore those facts, okay, and go ahead and not only give him a ministerial position, but also to put him in the Prime Minister's office, don't you think the Prime Minister owes us an explanation? What is it that he knows that the rest of us don't know? How is it that he's been able to now cross that line in terms of saying Richard has been cleared and he's good to go?
But the people were aware of that and they voted for him.
And we've seen that in the past. And as I said to you, the number that you have to look at very carefully is the number of people that didn't vote in Castries Central. And so to your point, we certainly did not create a case, an overwhelming case for people to come out and support us. And so that doesn't take away from me, but I'm just saying to you, where are we going in politics? You know, you have the same situation with Ernest Hilaire. I mean, here's an individual in which we now know factually that he was involved in the architect behind getting a billionaire a diplomatic passport. I mean, there's a very famous interview with you before the 2000 and I think it was 16 election, in which he denied that he even knew if he'd gotten a diplomatic passport. Okay, we now know that that was a lie. We know that he and Jufali opened up a joint account and Jufali transferred money into that account. We also know that no permission was obtained to open up that account. So it means our Financial Act requires the Accountant General, requires the Ministry of Finance, and certainly the Oversight Ministry, Foreign Affairs, to have known that the account was being opened up. There's nothing on record. And that the money was transferred in the account, and then some of that money then, over 3/4 of the money, was transferred to Ernest's personal account. There's no explanation.
Well, I can't verify this one. Yeah. I really can't verify. But let me tell you.
But then you have the situation with the car, right? So you also have an individual who has laid claim and imported a car which he says is his, contrary to all the evidence. And we now know what he did. He attempted to purchase the vehicle first in Tafala Williams' name. Tafala Williams didn't qualify. He then put the car in the name of the High Commission. Once you put it in the name of the High Commission, it becomes an asset of the state. He gets a pre-delivery, okay, and he cannot complete his entry because he doesn't have the evidence. Now, this speaks to character.
But you've been speaking about this for the better part of several years.
Not several years.
Mr. Chastanet, for a while now.
Yes.
Quite a while.
The evidence has been there.
Right? So then the people did not buy into this because Dr. Ernest Hilaire won the Castries South seat.
Correct.
He's now in the cabinet. He's a tourism minister. Does that say something about your administration in terms of its credibility?
I think it says a lot, but also it speaks to the Labour Party. Because you cannot on one hand tell me I need to fire Eubalus Raymond for the issues that came up, okay? And the issues that Eubalus had pale in comparison to any of the two issues I've spoken about, right?
But where does that leave the people?
So this is the point. So the question is that in moving forward, as I said to you, when you're in opposition, you listen. Okay? Now you have the opportunity of doing. So what they're doing is completely contrary to what they said. They talked about, Philip here talked about accountability, no corruption, transparency. Yeah? And used examples within my party of that. And I kept on saying to Philip, you don't have to wait to be prime minister to resolve these issues. Now, he never addressed them. It never became a hot topic for the elections. Now he's in government. At minimum, he owes us an explanation. Okay? This is the information that's out there about these two characters. Why is it that you've put them in your cabinet? And more importantly, not only do you put them in the cabinet, you put one in the Prime Minister's office, the other one now you've put in the Ministry of Investment and responsible for CIP. And we see that the first action of the CIP was to do what? The CEO has been sent on leave for 2 months without pay? Sorry, with pay? Why? And then you now come to the House because you're dissatisfied how the technocrats responded to you, and that you now say, okay, the way to resolve that is just amend the law.
But I don't think the CEO has been fired because he just attended a meeting earlier this month, some meeting in his capacity as CEO.
The CEO has been sent on leave. He's been on leave for 2 months.
Okay, but I just came across some information, I think it was either yesterday or today, we attended a meeting in his capacity as CEO of the CIP.
I would double check that because he's on leave.
Okay. The other issue is the Speaker's decision, and he made it very clear yesterday. Will you challenge the Speaker on this? Because he said that until November the 30th of this month, you basically will not be getting paid for the fact that you've been absent for about four months, thereabout. And he's given you sufficient time to provide him with an explanation that is acceptable for your absence away from St. Lucia, away from your job as the MP and / leader of the opposition.
So first of all, let me say this to you. I respect Parliament, and I also respect the fact that Speaker of the House is the head of Parliament. So, and I will always treat both with the utmost respect. My absence from Parliament had nothing to do with a protest. Okay, so I wasn't, not coming to Parliament because I was protesting something. When I checked and confirmed, constitutionally, there is no role for the leader of the opposition in opening Parliament. So by me not being there doesn't prevent Parliament from proceeding. Okay? They have a very clear majority, 15-2. Right? So I'm not holding up any legislation. I'm not allowing democracy to be derailed in any way. And in the standing orders, there is a very clear provision for if somebody is going to be absent from Parliament. And that is that you notify the parliamentary clerk or directly to the Speaker that you're going to be absent.
But just saying that I'm overseas, is that sufficient? Shouldn't you say that you're overseas and why you are overseas?
So I'll ask you this question. If you were in my shoes and you sent a note and said, I'm not going to be able to attend Parliament because I'm out of state, okay? You get a receipt saying that the message was received. You make a follow-up phone call, you speak to the Speaker, okay? He acknowledged that he received the receipt. If in fact you receive no information afterwards, you do that once, you do it twice the same way, and you do it a third time. So on no occasion was I told that what I had sent was not satisfactory. So I had to assume that I'd met the criteria. So the Speaker of the House yesterday made it publicly known that he didn't think that that was sufficient. And it's fine. So he and I had a discussion, and I'll remedy that situation. But it's interesting to me that this really, to have been played out the way it was, begs the question, why? So in order for me to be in any kind of dispute with the House, I would have to miss the House sittings 6 times consecutively without an excuse. So here it is, I thought I was providing the excuse. I thought I was meeting the criteria. You're now telling me I'm not meeting the criteria, but it's only 3 times. And here I am on the 4th meeting. So the issue with regards to withholding my salary as leader of the opposition, I don't personally believe that that's within the purview of the Speaker of the House. Because the same Stephenson King made these claims that he doesn't know how I was appointed the leader of the opposition because there was no vote. What vote? The entity or the individual who appoints the leader of the opposition is the Governor General. And there's criteria that the Governor General uses to make that decision.
But doesn't it entail the support of the opposition MPs? That would include...
I said to you there's criteria that is used. So the fact is that it is who the Governor General believes is in opposition. It's an important criteria. So he has to believe that you're actually opposed to the government.
Yeah.
And that you have the standing and the support of the majority in opposition. So the only other political party in opposition, the United Workers' Party, is Bradley and myself.
Yeah, but does the Constitution recognize political parties in Parliament? In Parliament does not recognize political parties.
No, but
Yeah?
in making the determination, and these are all really good things for us to have discussions about, is other evidence. So did either one of the independents who are independents have a mechanism behind them where there was a convention to elect them? Okay? The answer is no. Does the United Workers' Party have a convention and they have a process for electing a political leader? The answer is yes. And it also just happens that Bradley is also part of that system. So I think that when I offered my resignation and the party turned down the resignation, and given the United Workers' Party had 2 people in the office, and more importantly, both independents had accepted roles in the cabinet, by a process of elimination, it became me, right? So what I'm saying to you, that's not under the purview of Parliament. The Speaker brought up something that was very interesting yesterday. So he said that in a case in Trinidad, while you are elected and you become an MP on the day of the election, and that process is done through the election, that you don't start receiving your salary until you've been sworn in. And when you're sworn in, it's then made retroactively to the date you were elected. So, you know, could it be, even without being censored by him, sanctioned by him, that I should not have received a parliamentarian salary until I was sworn in? You know, those are things that they have to figure out. But to say that you're going to withhold my salary because I didn't come to Parliament, I'm not so sure there's a basis for that. But I respect the Speaker. I wait for his final decision on that matter. And as I said to you, I sat and listened, okay? And we'll see where it goes.
But between now and the 30th, will you be submitting any explanation to the Speaker? Clarification as to why you were absent?
Yeah, I'm obligated to.
You will?
Of course.
What will that explanation be?
I was out for personal reasons.
You will not be specific.
Why do I have to be specific? I mean, again, it's for him to be specific with me.
Yeah.
So
because in the private sector, right? I'm saying that I cannot report for duty at DBS, and my manager would. I don't think it has happened, but she would ask, well, why? If she were to ask why, should I tell her it's for personal reasons?
So our system,
not tell her why?
the Parliament system doesn't have that. You know, so at the end of the day, I'm hoping that I can provide, and the information I would provide to the Speaker is sufficient. And the Constitution, sorry, not the Constitution, the standing orders aren't clear. It's his prerogative. That's what I'm saying to you. I respect the fact that it's his prerogative, and I would adhere to whatever ruling that he decides. And once he has established a ruling, as I said, I listen without prejudice, and I'll see where it goes.
So if he rules no pay, you okay with that?
I didn't say that. I said to you that I would accept it without prejudice. Without prejudice means that I maintain the right to challenge it if I think it's necessary. But again, I want to be very clear. I respect Parliament. I respect the Speaker of the House. It was a bit long, but I enjoyed the explanation that he gave. And certainly I don't want to be a foul or for anyone to believe I'm disrespectful of Parliament. So what's most important is for the public to appreciate there was no message I was trying to send by not being there. I have been in politics since 2006. I took over as political leader in 2013. I went through 3 conventions, if you remember. I've been prime minister. A lot of pressure on because of COVID. The people have spoken. Yes, I've been reduced now, or been now put in the role as a leader of the opposition. The government has the first 100 days to get settled down. I mean, so the role that I would have played in the initial part was not a very important role at this point. And I took advantage of the opportunity to meet with my family, to get some good R&R. But I want to say that I'm not the only person deserving of that. I'm able to do that at this point because of the results of the election. But there are a lot of people who are deserving of the same thing. And I can tell you, it has been incredibly refreshing to me. And I've learned a lot about myself, and certainly what I would do and what I would do differently if I ever were to return to the position. This job is very demanding, it's very consuming, and you have to be very, very careful.
Before I present to you my follow-up question, incidentally, I just got a note, and it's coming from my boss, right? And she said, please go on until 10:30. Will you stick around until 10:30? So, that's a power that bosses have, right? So that's a note. All right.
I'm glad she's not the one I had to go and seek permission from.
Yeah. So my follow-up question now is, taking that break, it's long, 4 months.
3 months.
Yeah, 3 months, okay, close to 4 months, 3 months, okay. If you were elected, if you had won the elections, you would not have stayed away for 4 months.
I would have been straight into the work.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying to you. And I say these things, and I hope that people appreciate what I'm saying. Because of the result of the elections, it presented me with the opportunity to do that. Okay? So if I had not won the elections, I would have, had to grind it out. And I would have. But the fact is that the elections came in, we lost 15-2. You have a new government coming in, they got to get their cabinet in place. I know all the meetings that take place. You have the first 100 days coming in. I don't think it would be good for us as a political party to be putting any unnecessary pressure on them. The first set of bills that came through were bills that we actually drafted. So I didn't really have any controversy with any of those bills. So the question becomes the representation to my constituents. That's between me and my constituents. I have, I think, a very good working relationship with my constituents. I'm sure that there are persons, if you ask, they're probably disappointed I've not been around. But at the end of the day, I also have to adjust to what the government's going to do. Who are the new boards? So, who do I go to in the meanwhile to get certain things done? The government has to settle down. And that's what I'm saying to you, Tim. I saw an opportunity to take a break, and I took it, right? And I'm very grateful for doing it. But I am back. I'm not abandoning my post. I'm not abandoning my responsibilities in any particular way. I've stayed within this prescribed time of Parliament. As I said to you, by all evidence, I thought that I was conforming to what was required. The Speaker has taken the opportunity publicly to indicate that he was not satisfied, and that's fine, and I will now rectify that situation moving forward. But the fact is, I'm not in breach of anything.
How do you condition yourself mentally to be on the opposition benches and to face some of your arch political rivals? I mean, that will include Mr. Philip J. Pierre, one, also Richard Frederick, and also Mr. Stevenson King. How do you condition yourself? Because I think you walked out of Parliament when Richard started his contribution, I think, yesterday. Was that deliberate on your part?
I had a phone call.
Okay.
And so I went out. But maybe you should ask Kenny Anthony the same question. Why is he not in cabinet? Now, there's tremendous amount of speculation as to why he's not in cabinet. But maybe at some point...
In the sitting of Parliament? He said cabinet.
No, it's cabinet.
In the cabinet, okay.
Why is he not in the cabinet?
Yeah, but he's not a government minister.
Why?
Mm-hmm. Well, we heard the explanation that was given by the Prime Minister. So you don't give credence to that?
I said to you need to ask him, right? I've heard otherwise, and there are claims that he made. So look, at the end of the day, I have zero difficulty in facing anyone. I think I can defend myself. I'm very clear on what we did. At all times, I tried to adhere to the rule of law, practice democracy to the highest level I possibly could. And I'm very proud of what we were able to achieve. So being in Parliament and being able to answer some of the things directly is not always possible. So for instance, ministers' reports, there's no rebuttal. So we sat there for, 8 hours? Every minister got up and gave a speech, which they're entitled to do, but there's no rebuttal. So there were a lot of statements that were made that were very controversial, but I have to sit and just listen to them. And so in the process of a debate, I try my best to try to clarify information as much as possible. So let's take the Hunor Airport as a good example. I listened to what Philip Pierre said. It's laughable. It's not overly complicated. It's a very simple issue.
And my producer may be able to get a report that was aired this evening during the DBS News World by Zin Romula, so we could play the report if we have time in just a moment. But you were saying about the Hunor International.
So let's take it by steps. Mm-hmm. So the location of the airport, they were suggesting was because of DSH. Had nothing to do with DSH.
I think the report we have is the one on St. Jude. So we'll play the one on St. Jude a little later, but continue.
No problem. So on the location of the airport, I was involved when I was Minister of Tourism and Civil Aviation in the first design of the airport. And the airport was supposed to be where the car park is, so behind the existing terminal. Mm-hmm. So what would have happened is that the construction would be taking place, you could continue to use the existing airport, and then as you get closer to completion, you demolish the airport and move in fully into the new airport. The number of arrivals we have today is almost 40% more than what we had in 2006 and 2007. So the disruption of having a construction site literally on the doorstep of the airport was going to be too complicated. We also said, okay, wait a second, given the possibility of a cruise ship terminal in the south, that would be a home port facility, why demolish the building? Because the building can be retrofitted. So if you can build the building adjacent to it, that solves the problem. It also means that the new entry into the airport is much easier. So if you're going to be going to Labrie, Choiseul, or Soufriere, instead of having make the round all the way through Vieux-Fort Town, you just make the left and you go on the La Ressource Road towards the Heineken factory and you're heading south. Also, from a hospital is very important infrastructural support for an airport. So now the highway to the new St. Jude's would be even closer to the airport in that particular location. And certainly in terms of longer term planning, there was more land available for the expansion of airport operations in that location because you already had confined yourself into a box where you currently are, because the free zone is literally behind it and the farm tank is behind it from that perspective. So let's put the location aside. Then you hear this whole fight or discussion, debate about how the airport should be paid for. And there are two proposals on the table. One is what's called a PPP or a concession, and the other one is SLASPA and government-led investment. The source of paying back for the airport is exactly the same. It's the airport tax. Okay, there's no free lunch. With the PPP, the concession, the requirement was $60 US per passenger. And the concession was for 30 years. Right? With the SLASPA-led deal, it's a loan from the Taiwanese for 20 years with a 5-year moratorium, and it's $35 per passenger. The difference is that under the PPP, if now the numbers of arrivals are greater than what your projections are, all of that money goes to the concessionaire. In your SLASPA-led operation, if you earn more money, it allows you to pay the loan down faster, and it means that instead of being 20 years, you can actually get the money, the full amount of money back on an earlier basis. So the other issue that's being brought up is to say, well, the debt to GDP. So if you have it as a government-led project, it goes towards your debt to GDP. But if it is a PPP, the assumption that it doesn't. But when we went and checked it out, the IMF considers it a contingent liability. Why? Because it's a significant asset. If in fact the concessionaire goes bankrupt, who's going to take it over? Government.
But are both arrangements risky?
Every arrangement is always risky. So the fact is that the risk to the government on the concessionaire is that you're giving almost twice the amount of money to the developer to cover the risk. Yes, $60 for 30 years versus $35 for 20 years. Huge difference. And as I said to you, if you buy into the concept that the source of money is the same, why would the government want to give anybody that kind of concession? What is the charm in building an airport? It's what's made it more complicated this time is what has happened with COVID. Nobody could predict COVID. The cost of freight has gone up. The getting of materials has become more expensive. But then there was this question, well, why did we not go out to tender? And how is it that OECD was selected? Well, the entity that provided the financing was the Taiwanese. OECD is a public sector, private sector partnership in Taiwan. So the company is publicly and privately owned. The company built the airport in St. Vincent. The company is currently building the new airport terminal in Taipei. So this is a massive construction company doing work all throughout Latin America and the Caribbean and obviously back in Taiwan. More than capable. And because the Taiwanese government gave the loan, that seemed the right thing to be able to do and to give them the level of accountability. So, the suggestion...
But for transparency's sake and accountability and so on, don't you think it should have been better to go through that process, the tendering process?
Well, from a time perspective, it didn't. So if in fact that's why I made the point of JICA. I mean, theirs went out to tender, but it only went out to tender to Japanese companies. Right? So the JICA bridge that's going up in cul-de-sac was funded by the Japanese. Who are the companies that are doing it? Japanese companies. The only companies that could bid were Japanese companies. And the fact is OECD is also joint venturing with companies here in St. Lucia in the region. So the company that's doing the piling is a very well-known, reputable company that came in from BVI, Meridian, who's doing the piling. And that was put out to bid. The package to build all the different stuff is being put out to bid, right? But what you're doing is you're really having OECD supervise and manage the entire process. And I think that was to give the Taiwanese the confidence that the money is going to be spent correctly. But all the different components are being put out to bid. So the piling was put out to bid, the main structure is being put out to bid, the supply of materials are being put out to bid.
The Prime Minister also said that there would have been cost overruns and the project would be delayed. I think he said that the project would cost at least over $400 million.
I have to see that to believe that. I know that there will be some additional costs because of what's happened with COVID. You've seen what's happened to the cost of freight. You've seen what's happened to the cost of materials. I know that even when we were there was a lot of discussion going because you have 3 different groups helping supervise and manage the airport project. So you have OECD, that's the overall construction advisors. You have the architectural firms that are also making sure from a quality control perspective. And then SLASPA created a special project unit to also now represent the government at those meetings. So there's a mechanism on how to resolve conflicts. Now, ultimately, somebody's going to have to make a decision. If, in fact, there is going to be higher costs because of whatever reason, the people have to sit down and look at the evidence and make the determination as to whether they think that that's worth it. And if you want to cut back on the project, fine. But at the end of the day, when you're cutting back on the project, make sure it's not going to cost you more money in the end run. So let's take Barbados as an example. In the Barbados airport, which was only recently done like 15 years ago, the decision was made not to have the jetways at all. So you've been to the Barbados airport. There's no jetways, right? Now they want to put jetways, and that's going to cost over $100 million. So that whole tent roof that they have has to come down because now they have to build a second floor. So, when you're building, I don't want to call it legacy, critical infrastructural projects that are going to last many years, you can't build them for today. You have to build them for what you think is going to perceive is going to be down the road. So, look, that's why you have the professionals are there. But in some way, to suggest that all of this is taking place because there's corruption involved. That's the part, Tim, that really is very disconcerting, that you can just go and make these statements, and some people actually believe that that's the case because they hear all these millions of dollars and they think, well, the politicians have their hands in it. I am very proud of the fact that we were arm's length away, and the same Stephenson King, who portrays himself as the patriot, was under his ministry. Right? The SLASPA reports to him. My ministry dealt with the financial part of it. His ministry deals with the construction part of it.
Let's focus on St. Jude Hospital. I think we might have that report by DBS's Zane Romulus. The report was filed this evening during our DBS News World.
At another session of Parliament, Prime Minister Pierre has promised to lay the final report from the Review Committee on the St. Jude Hospital reconstruction project. But on Tuesday, he did reveal some critical findings of the committee as well as the way forward on the project. The construction of the structures, which had been abandoned by the previous Alan Chastanet administration, he says, will be finished.
It is clear, Mr. Speaker, that the United Workers' Party government failed in its duty to provide health care to the people of the South by not completing the St. Jude Hospital. The decision was deliberate, callous, and aimed at financially benefiting members of the administration and their friends. As we continue to aim at providing adequate health care to the people of St. Lucia, we will complete the construction of St. Jude Hospital Phase 1. In this regard, we will seek engagement of power to identify a senior level czar to coordinate and provide general oversight to the St. Jude Hospital reconstruction project.
Former Prime Minister Alan Chastanet, however, sees this decision as a bad idea, explaining why his administration had opted to build a new structure.
They spent over $130 million on the old building. In their own letter, which Dr. Anthony received, they said they were going to have to spend another $80 million to finish it. When we looked at it, that number was about correct. It was going to be somewhere between $80 and $100 million. But what we realized is in spending that amount of money, we would have an inferior hospital. Okay, the heights of the ceilings, the size of the rooms, and the ability to change anything becomes difficult. So one of the things that they were saying yesterday in the House as being a negative is actually a positive, because they said there's an open space and there's drywall. Yes, so that as the hospital needs change, it's easier to make those changes. Whereas when you have concrete walls, and some of them are structural walls, you can't move, you can't maneuver. And the reality is that what we said is that the original building should be used as a university or a medical center. Okay, so it's not like it's not going to be used.
The review committee found that the new structure was less than 30% complete. That from its commencement in February 2019 to July 2021, the cumulative expenditure on this structure stood at an estimated $118 million. The Prime Minister rubbished claims by the previous administration that work could have continued on the upper level of the structure while patients were housed on the bottom floor.
The status report states that an amount of $89.3 million has been paid to date and the remainder is still owed. In relation to the new hospital, the review committee found that there is no program for the completion of any part of phase 2 of the new hospital to facilitate the transfer of the operations from the George Odlum Stadium to the St. Jude Hospital into part or all of level 2 of the new hospital.
But former Prime Minister Alan Chastanet says most of the critical components of the new structure when he demitted office were already in place for a transfer to happen, and challenges anyone who says otherwise.
I challenge anyone to go and look at the two buildings for themselves and make the determination. This absurdity that there's no water or electricity. All the water pipes are there connected, and all of the electrical stuff are there. The difference in the design that we were doing is instead of all of that stuff being embedded in the walls, it's in the ceiling. That's why you have the high ceilings. And that is now proven to be the best way of construction, because if you want to access any of that, it becomes easier. You're not going to lay down wire and put all of that stuff when it remains an open site. That's one going to be the last things, because in the building itself, all the electrical stuff underground is already there. All the water stuff is already, all the pipes are already there. In terms of in finishing the internal part could not be finished until the cladding was finished. The cladding went up, and then it had to be properly sealed. The design that was being put in place is that the operations from the stadium would be transferred to downstairs. And because the physical building was already completed, the build out upstairs is really just to add the beds and putting down your tiling. None of that is going to interfere with any of the operations. And this is a common practice around the world.
In any case, it is now left up to the current administration to deliver some semblance of a hospital to the people of the South, who have been without a proper facility since 2009. For the DBS News World, I am Zane Romulus.
Thank you very much, Zane, for this report we just filed this evening during the DBS News World. Mr. Former Prime Minister, I guess the indictment is on our politicians. I mean, for 4 administrations now, we've not been able to complete this health institution. That would include your administration, sir. What do you say to this?
It's difficult, and I understand everybody's frustrations. You know, I remember when I was an economist in planning in mid-80s. Romanis Lancico became the Minister of Health, okay? And we started plans for the OKEU, right? Look how long that took. I'm proud of the work that we achieved with St. Jude's. I think that the structure is there for everyone to go and see for itself. It looks like a hospital. You know, when you go to Baptist Hospital or you go to other international hospitals, this is what hospitals look like. And more importantly, again, Tim, the hospital was being built and designed for the future, that it had the capacity to be able to grow. So it was using all the modern technologies. The cladding that we were using is all modern stuff that helps with environmental issues and the conservation of energy. So the space between the claddings is large so that the heat is absorbed. And then the cold is absorbed, so you don't have as much humidity. So a lot of the mold issues that you're seeing in a lot of buildings, this building takes that into consideration. The space layout. So the idea is that on tracks is where all the electrical fittings go and where all the plumbing goes. So if in fact you want to change the design of a room, it becomes very easy to be able to do that. The hospital was 60 days away from being completed to facilitate the movement from St. Jude's. I would have very much liked it to have been earlier. Okay? I'm disappointed that we could not have gotten it done earlier. But I'm also a reasonable person in understanding the circumstances. So remember when we first came in, the intention was to finish the building. Okay, so it's when the ministers came back to me and explained to me what was there, I was shocked that I was going, that's impossible. And then when we unearthed all of the letters and also unearthed the closing report from the previous manager, that I started to understand. And then when we had FDL do the assessment along with an Italian group, and there was somebody else from the University of West Indies, that's when they said to me, the building is inferior. And I was then taken on a tour and explained why it was inferior. So it's not to say, and persons who know me, I'm not an office person. So I go and physically see these things, and people have to be able to convince me one way or the other. And certainly, when I went to see the Cayman Health facility in Cayman, you know, I was just in awe because the simplicity of what it was. And so the design of the hospital here, the DNA of that came from that facility. And I was expecting for us to be able to finish it in 1.5 years. Sadly, with planning, drawing down of funds, sourcing of materials, and then when COVID hit, it did not become possible. And I was trying my best to expedite the moving as quickly as possible. The last part really, Tim, was the final set of financing. And before I left, I put all of that in play in terms of exactly how it was going to be funded. So it would have meant some of the money that we were going to use for other projects, i.e. the money that was going to be used for housing, that was going to be transferred to be able to finish the airport. But I felt that the hospital, was a sufficiently important enough asset that it should be completed. And again, every time I go to St. Jude's, my heart goes out. But the reality is, there was not a lot that we could have done. This idea that we could have somehow within a couple of months finished the project, their own letters indicated that that was impossible. And so as Minister of Finance at the time, and Philip Pierre is now the Minister of Finance, and he's going to have to make those decisions. And he's going to have to live with those decisions.
And he has appointed a review committee. Do you think that is the source of the problem, where administration after administration will have to review the work that was undertaken by the previous regime so that they could come up with sufficient reasons as to besmirch the character of the previous administration, and then they stall the project? Is that what has bedeviled this particular initiative to the extent 12 years after we do not have a St. Jude Hospital fully completed?
I can certainly speak for myself. I certainly did not commission any report to lay blame on anybody else. I mean, I would have loved nothing more than to have been able to have opened up the hospital and transferred everybody over. Okay? But once I was supplied with the evidence of the report, and I would say to you, people have made all kinds of allegations against FDL in terms of an engineering company. Here's a guy that is the primary engineering company that CDB uses all throughout the region. Has over 170 employees. Okay? So pretty professional person. And that he went in and got people experienced in the hospitality industry to help him do the report. The report was provided to the Ministry of Health, which was then brought to Cabinet. And there was an opportunity for everybody to question everything, and to the best of our ability, and in terms including site inspections. Who's the government taking? Mark Hennicott? That's the head? Really? Here's a person that spent the entire time of my administration on social media, everywhere bashing me, bashing my government, blah, blah, blah. Comes from a very small architectural firm. He's done some hotels and stuff like that. He did the police stations. Are the police stations that his company designed something that we should go out and brag about? A lot of problems. So again, when you go and you now put people who are politically involved, have you ever heard FDL on a platform? Have you ever seen social media comments from anybody from FDL choosing sides of any one government or another? It's difficult enough to find individuals like that. But when you now have individuals who stay out of the fray of the politics and stay in the realm of their professionalism, right? And that those persons' characters are being brought and questioned, it's a side indictment against us. And it's something that really needs to stop. And so who you choose and the method that you go about doing reviews is important. And it tells you everything about what you want to do. Mark Hennicott criticized the airport, the St. Jude's from day one. How do I expect him to come up with anything different? But sadly, two sets of people are going to be paying the price for that. One is the staff at St. Jude's, and the other persons are the citizens in the South who continue to depend on the services in the South. So I wish I could say something more. I wish I could make it happen faster. I can't. And these are the things that we tend to work with. And, I was attending a parliamentary meeting for Public Accounts Committee. Mm-hmm. And one of the case studies was hospitals. And the persons from England said one of the greatest problems globally has been the construction of hospitals. And he attributed that to the fact that people are trying to generate legacy modern facilities, and sometimes of things that don't exist. And so it makes it very difficult when you're trying to live up to that particular standard. And so hospitals tend to be very complicated. OKEU had its problems. Every hospital around the Caribbean, when you go to Trinidad, etc., are problems. You try your best to prevent that from happening, and then they become more complicated because sometimes, like what's happened in St. Lucia and what's happened in other countries, we've gotten into a habit now of changing our governments every 5 years, right? And so it makes it even much more complicated because everybody brings in their own new legacy and their own new strategies.
So therefore, you like this administration to win the next general election, to continue the work?
What I saw in the first 100 days, I wouldn't wish that upon any St. Lucian. Okay, it's been a dismal failure. The way that they've managed COVID, and they benefited from having seen a government manage COVID. They were part of the different committees. But again, the promises that they made to people, they could not deliver on. And in fact, those promises has generated a disastrous result. I mean, think of it. 2 people have died every day in the first 100 days. So in 18 months, you had 84 people die. In 100 days, you've had 188 people die. In 18 months, you had 5,200 people becoming infected. In 100 days, you've had over 7,300 people becoming infected. The evidence is there for itself.
Well, they had to grapple with the variant, the Delta variant.
They had the vaccine. They had the benefit of protocols that could work. So when you come out and you say, I'm going to expunge people's records, I don't believe in state of emergencies, I don't believe in curfews and stuff like that, you send a very strong message. I can tell you, in September, when we dropped the state of the emergency and dropped curfew, all of a sudden people felt, okay, it was over and they can go out. So we learned over time, keeping a curfew 9, 10 o'clock at night, changing your access to alcohol and your curfews as things break out. So the problem that we have right now, and the evidence is there globally, we don't have to go and relearn this thing. Germany, this last week, 67% of their population is vaccinated. Compare that to St. Lucia, 20%. Massive outbreak.
Well, you're a little more than 20% now.
Okay. Well, Barbados is what? 40%? 284 cases this week. 284 cases. Okay? So once we are at that level of vaccination, and they're saying now herd immunity is closer to 90%, for the foreseeable future, you're going to have outbreaks.
For how long should we continue to maintain the protocols? Because Jamaica has decided that very soon there would be relaxing the restrictions. Likewise, Trinidad and Tobago, today might be the last day of their state of emergency. In the case of St. Lucia, should we be moving forward and relaxing the protocols?
That would be the goal. And that really depends on the population. So we know that there's 2 things that each individual person can do to resolve the issue. 1, become vaccinated. Okay, that's the greatest thing. So if 90% of the people or more of solutions agree to become vaccinated, that would certainly make sure and ensure that we can reduce the protocols and protect ourselves. The second one is that people are going to adhere to the protocols. Now, adhering to the protocols becomes difficult because it's social distancing, it's wearing your mask, etc. And people are tired of all of that. So until we can find the balance between those 2 things, and we can keep the numbers down, then you can relax your protocols. But the moment the numbers go back up again, like what happened, the Labour Party ignored it. Ignored the first set of numbers in the first 2 weeks. Said, oh, whatever, it's not going to happen. And it just grew and it grew. And why does it grow? Because your infection rate increases. So if your infection rate is 1, it means that if one person has it, one other person is going to get it. And that slows down the spread. But if your infection rate is 3, 4, 5, 6, it means that every time one person has it, they're going to infect 6 people. You can see how quickly it's going to spread. So the answer to your question lies in the hands of the population and lies in the ability of any government to convince its population to adopt those strategies.
Are you in support of a vaccine mandate?
Well, we didn't do it as a government, but I do believe that there has to be a reward to those persons who become vaccinated. And one of the things that we were designing was the electrical pass, so it became easier to determine who was vaccinated and who was not, because there was a lot of forgeries going on, and the document we had was easy to forge. So I do believe that if persons are going to become vaccinated, then they should have access to certain things. America's already said it. You can't come into America unless you're vaccinated.
We wonder about people losing their jobs because they decided not to take
Well,
the vaccine.
each person has to make that determination. So in the absence of becoming vaccinated, are you prepared to be tested on a weekly basis or a bi-monthly basis?
But should people be given that option then, instead of losing their
I think
jobs?
I think they should be given the option, but then who pays for it? Should the business pay for it?
Are you suggesting that the individual pay for it?
I'm just asking you the question. So you see, these are tough questions to be able to answer. And again, as a business person who are looking at these things, the disruption to business, the threat to your own business, the risk that you're at, these become very difficult things to make a determination. And then also I think that, Tim, I think this is the part that's being lost here, is our own respect to each other. Don't I have an obligation to become vaccinated for you? Don't I have an obligation to become vaccinated for those persons who have underlying conditions? Don't I have an obligation for those persons who depend on tourism or international trade to become vaccinated for them? Because that's really the only way that we can ensure the kind of success we need. Here we are, that millions of people have been vaccinated. So this idea that it's a chip, this idea that it's going to harm me, it's not there.
But instead of saying, shouldn't we change the narrative? Instead of saying vaccinate for somebody else, vaccinate for children, vaccinate for the country, vaccinate for the economy, shouldn't we be vaccinating for yourself?
I agree.
And people have decided that they will not take, some people have decided not to be vaccinated. That's a personal decision they've taken.
Yeah, so if you're not going to do it, so let's look at what's going on in the NBA. My good friend from the Nets, right, Irvin, he chose that he's not going to become vaccinated. So they said no problem. The league has a vaccinated rule. Why? Because when they're traveling to different cities and different countries, there is that requirement, and so you can't have a different set of rules for everybody else, and so he's not getting paid. So the same time, for persons who do not want to get vaccinated, how is it that they want to complain about some of the recourses of making that decision? Those are all decisions we have to make. Sadly, COVID has been a significant disruptor in the world. And I've said this often, Tim, that there is a term that I use called post-COVID trauma. The price of fuel is at $81. Container prices have gone up 3 times as much. Airlines have lost billions of dollars. Companies have lost billions of dollars. Countries are pumping in trillions of dollars back into their overall economy and increasing the levels of debt. And there's going to be a fallout from all of that. And are we prepared? So first of all, the new government should have had a control of the COVID situation in the first 100 days, because there was a track record that worked. But you campaigned against that track record and those policies, and you used the emotional argument. Now you sit there again, and you talk about transparency, accountability, democracy, and following the rule of law. And here it is that, the Prime Minister of Trinidad was asked a question. When you drop the state of emergency at the end of the month, I don't know if you saw the clip, and the reporter said, well, what happens to the curfew? He says, you cannot have a curfew without a state of emergency. This government, in its typical deceitfulness, says, okay, we're not going to have the state of emergency, we're not going to have a curfew, but we're now going to call it confinement. Right? It is confinement in the COVID bill was contemplated as the CMO saying to somebody, if you are infected, you must remain confined. If we've identified you, so if the family member that you're living with has tested positive, I can say to you, Tim, I need you to stay in quarantine for 2 weeks until I am satisfied that you don't have COVID. If you have people traveling from other countries, that she can require people to be quarantined. But that is a far away from saying to the entire country that I'm going to put you in a curfew. Now, it's important to understand the issue. My government wrote the COVID bill, which is an amalgamation of the health bill and the quarantine bill, and modernized it. Because there are a lot of things of new modern technologies, your electronic bracelets, all the tests that you do, that didn't exist in those days. And so that had to be incorporated into the bill. But we were very clear that the bill could do everything except it could not create a curfew. When you go into the Constitution, Section 14, which is the emergency powers, what does it say? It says in Section 3, if in fact you want to create a law that contravenes or takes away people's civil liberties, Section 3 or Section 13, you must do it in the confines of a state of emergency. Why? Because it is a huge step to take away people's civil liberties. And it must be done only under special circumstances in which there are very strict conditions to doing that. So the condition is, one, that the Governor General must agree and declare it a state of emergency. So you can't just create a state of emergency any day that you want to. There has to be real reason to be able to do it. And that can only last for 1 week. The government then must go to Parliament and make a case for the state of emergency. And that any laws that you pass in the state of emergency that are going to take away from people's civil liberties must be only for the time period of the state of emergency. So if it's for 6 months, the law can only last for 6 months. There's also a requirement that when you finish the state of emergency, 3 months afterwards, Parliament is required to provide a report as to how they used the state of emergency and what happened with the different laws. So there's accountability. Now, I get that. And hopefully the best of people in St. Lucia also understand that. If you're going to take away a person's civil liberties, it has to be under those conditions. It can't just be a freeness to do what you want to do. How can you believe that a CMO should have the authority to advise a minister without even going to Parliament to take away your civil liberty, to cause you to be in a curfew? And so it's ridiculous. Now, this is where I think that the opposition matters. And this is what, when Philip Pierre says to me, you need to be careful of what you're going to say, because if you do and say those things, I'm going to come after you, right? Well, you can threaten me all you want to, but I'm going to say what I think many other people want to say. The issue with Richard Frederick. How did he find himself in the cabinet and the issue of his visa has not been settled? Or nobody's offered an explanation as to how that has happened. I get the electorate gets the choice to appoint, to elect him. But the decision to making him a minister is the political leader, is the prime minister. You serve at his behest. So it means that he is speaking and endorsing that person. So if he's going to endorse the person, don't you think that he owes it to the rest of us to say that? Now, many people in our society are not going to want to say that. That's the role of the opposition. I take that very seriously. It doesn't mean that they have to listen to everything that we're going to, but at least that they would have heard. And what we're saying, what we're seeing the attitude of this government is that they're going to ignore the opposition. And you generally get that anyway. But in this case, because it's 15-2, so let me give you an example. So here it is, we have two speakers. The economic fund bill comes up yesterday. And the government, after the prime minister spoke, nobody wants to speak. So Ernest says, well, if y'all don't speak, I'm going to close the debate. Okay? Now, we spoke. So after we've spoken, they came out and spoke, and nobody can offer a rebuttal. So not only do you have a majority of 15-2, right? You're going to use that majority to even silence the opposition further. So that's why I'm saying to you is that as a party, we've recognized the game. It would be foolhardy for me not to understand what's taking place. Foolhardy for me to believe that I can do anything to change that inside the parliament. But I certainly can hopefully advocate and work very hard to create the people's parliament. And yesterday, it was very gratifying to know the number of people that showed up to greet me to go into the House. Because that's the beginning of the movement. And the more often that the government continues to ignore doing the right thing, continues to make decisions that people don't understand.
This occasion the people are out, but the criticism is that during your reign as Prime Minister, people could not agitate and demonstrate outside the Parliament of St. Lucia because of the restrictions, and the reason given is because of COVID.
So the restrictions were exactly the same. The only difference was there was no barriers. Everybody was on the Valmont side of the building or in Constitutional Park. Okay, and the police were there to make sure they didn't come any closer to the parliamentary building. That's what I'm saying to you. You know, just because you say something often enough doesn't make it right. And that's the greatest lesson I think that we all are going to have to address. The ability to constructively criticize or critique information that's being sent to us. And not because you see it on social media. Not because you hear somebody speaking about in passion. So all the persons that you heard on TV shows, etc., bashing the government, where are they today? They're press secretaries, they're consultants, they're ambassadors. And that takes place on both sides, Tim. Okay? So the fact is that the public has a very difficult time in discerning that. And that's why my criticism of the media is not for them to be there. My criticism of the media sometimes is that when the facts are in front of you, present it that. You're not there to make the decision for people. And your job is to verify what those facts are and to keep people on the narrow so that the general public, but on social media, there's no Timothy Polion, There's no DBS. There's no institution. You're free to write and say what you want to say. And when you are emotionally involved, so COVID created emotion in the population. I don't want to be constrained. I don't think I'm getting enough. And yes, I see this, and I believe this story that this person's getting all this money and I'm not benefiting. Okay? It becomes emotional. You know, a person like Stevenson King.
Let me just put the telephone number on screen. You can call right now with your comments and questions for my guest. Once again, former Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Alan Chastanet. You're saying?
Yeah, you know, so there are persons that people believe that are out there. But again, now, I think that it's my job to do a better job of highlighting some of those conflicts.
You have a call? Good evening to you. This is Newsmakerlive. You're on the air.
Good evening, Tim.
Hi, good evening to you, caller.
I want to first say to the leader of the opposition that the 15-2 that we are experiencing in St. Lucia is as a result of the choice of the people of St. Lucia. Secondly, as leader of the opposition, this leader of the opposition has put the government in even more expense that he had, as Prime Minister of St. Lucia. He knows that he has run this country in a disaster economic situation, right? And now, when you have had several leaders of the opposition who served in the office on High Street, he found that it's not good enough for him. And now he has incurred a cost of from $5,000 a month rental, right? But taxpayers have to pay, and moving to $11,000 a month office, and even asking for an increase in his budget for his staff as well. You know what I'm saying? So there's nothing different about this gentleman. You know what I'm saying? It's all about taking the taxpayers for a ride. Secondly, he wants to insult Mark Hennicat, a well-renowned and respected architect throughout the Caribbean, right? And to let us know, Tim, that Mark Hennicat was not the only person on that committee. There are other professionals, there are engineers, and other people of that ilk that are on the committee who made the decision. So the decision was not only made by Mark Hennicat. So you're insulting the integrity of St. Lucian professionals, that you are not an architect, you're not an engineer, and you're saying to them that there's that there's not electrical and water system.
Okay, but caller, somebody just sent me information that the office is not $11,000 a month, it's $5,000. It's the same rent, caller. Not $11,000, $5,000.
What's $5,000?
No, I just got the information, sir. I just got somebody who said that the office is $5,000, not $11,000.
He requested it, Tim. I have facts on that. He requested $11,000 for that rent. They better reduce it for him.
Sir.
All right. Okay.
So, sir, I listened to the gentleman very, very carefully. So, first of all, Parliament gives you a budget. It's not about you requesting anything. The allocation for rent is $5,000. The office that we had, I used to be in that office before. It's problematic. To park in that area is difficult. Okay. And given what we intend to do, we didn't think it was an adequate office. There's been no repairs to that office in the longest of times. So we went to this location. We understood what the allocation was. We've lived within the allocation. We've found resources on our own to add to the resources that Parliament has given us. I would never ask Parliament, and nor would I believe Parliament give me any increase. So that's one. And this is, again, the misinformation that's coming out. I want to say on his assessment of Mark Hennicat and the group, I stand by what I said. And I think that the public of St. Lucia can see it for themselves, right? I know Mark. Mark was involved in my hotel project, and I think that Mark can do those kinds of projects. But a hospital? John Peters? John Peters was constantly on social media bashing my government, and already had in my mind a formulated opinion that he was already going to express. Now, John is a person I've spoken to many, many times. John is a person I like, but I have to say to you that recently I've had discussions with John, and the facts don't seem to matter anymore. If we genuinely believed, get an independent. You know, if you want to get Pahu to come down, go and do that. But even when they get expertise, so let's look at back in 1997, the then Kenny Anthony administration brought in the Commonwealth Secretariat to give a report on the Boundaries Commission. The report sits there. They've never implemented it. And I'm going to continue to advocate for the report because the report spells out very clearly what's supposed to happen. So many times when we do go and get the right expertise and it doesn't say what we want to say, it doesn't change anything. So to your point, who is on the board tells me a lot in terms of what the outcome that you want to be able to see.
Well, at point, we have a call. Good evening. Thank you so much for holding on. This is Newsmaker Live. You're on the air.
Yes, good evening, Tim. Good evening, leader of the opposition.
Good evening to you, caller.
Yes, I have a question. The former Minister of Health.
The former Minister of?
Was Health.
Of Health.
Yes.
Under your administration.
Mary Isaac.
Mary Isaac.
Yes, Mary Isaac. I can recall, right, and the news items are there, that when the issue with radical investment broke into the news, she distanced herself from this whole debacle with radical investment, and she stated that she followed protocol and followed the established lines and links for purchasing vaccine for the people of St. Lucia. And that the decision to go in bed with radical investment was a decision made by the former Prime Minister, which is Alan Chastanet, right, to purchase these vaccines from radical investment. It is, you are here with Timothy Polion today. I would like you please to explain to the St. Lucians why you went against protocol and, invested $7.3 million of St. Lucians taxpayers' money in purchasing vaccines from a company that you shouldn't be doing business with, period, as it relates to medication. I'm going to listen off air to your explanation. Thank you.
Okay, I will give you sufficient time to explain. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. So you have to put everything in context. So when the vaccines started coming out, there was an entity created called COVAX, which was with the UN and PAHO and also with what's it called, the Caribbean entity of PAHO, CARFA. And every week we're being promised we're going to get vaccines. The total amount of vaccines that we were going to get was supposed to be 10% of our population. Yeah? And we were getting them in dribs and drabs. And they were paying for the vaccine. So we knew that the cost of the vaccine, when you were able to purchase it on bulk, and remember in the case of COVAX, they were getting hundreds of millions of vaccines. So they were getting it for $4 a unit. Many of the leaders in the region were balking. We were constantly complaining. We wrote letters collectively to the Prime Minister in the UK, who indicated that he understands and empathizes with what we're going through, but all of his contributions are going to be done through PAHO. We wrote to Biden and to Trump, and the answers were very much the same. We wrote to the Canadians, and the Canadians, again, were very sympathetic, but they said they're going to be doing everything through COVAX. The CARICOM came together, and we were going to try to purchase through the African Union. So the African Union was going to be purchasing vaccines for the entire Union. We were asked to send monies to some African country. All these attempts were being made. All the while, the protocols are being followed. So this is where the gentleman is a little bit off in terms of his protocols. So the protocols are that the Ministry of Health approves the vaccine. So details of the vaccine is sent to the Ministry of Health and say, is this going to work? So in the case of Radical, they were getting AstraZeneca, right? I wouldn't say every day, but fairly frequently we had persons coming in and making offers to purchase vaccines for us. There was a group that we were in discussions with out of Dubai. It was going to cost us $50 a shot. There was a group out of Washington, D.C. that was at $35 a shot. And very often they said that the minimum purchases you could make was 1 million. Now, St. Lucia doesn't need 1 million vaccines and can't afford 1 million vaccines if we're going to have to pay that kind of money for it. So Radical contacted me. The gentleman who represented Radical does business in St. Lucia. He's in the cement business, and he also purchased the Shock Lands, and he's also been involved in other construction. Landings, as an example, is one of the developments that he was involved in here. So it's a known entity. He called me to say that he was working with a group, Serum, out of the UK, that are in discussions with AstraZeneca to purchase 1 million units. They've gotten Barbados government and the Bahamian government to be involved. Each of those countries were going to take 300,000. He asked whether we could take 300,000. I said we couldn't afford to take 300,000, and the price was $27. So I said we would take 100,000. We had long discussions with the command center. The CMO and I sat down with the director of finance, and we deliberated over this decision for a very long time to make a decision. So we made a commitment, and he said, because you're getting 100,000, you're going to have to pay the money up front. So the the Attorney General's office got involved, and a contract was put together that we would make the money in advancement, but if in fact a certain date came by and they could not deliver it, the monies would be reimbursed to us. From a due diligence perspective, I spoke to the leaders of those two countries and confirmed that there had been discussions and they had made commitments. In terms of how much they were paying, I did not get confirmation from that. But I got a very good sense that everybody was paying the same price for the individual units. So before we finally signed it, we kept on waiting for COVAX to come forward. It then got delayed by another month. Now, Tim, I know that the opposition made it out to believe that I didn't care. So the problem that I had was I knew once we had elections that the activity that would take place would put people's lives at risk. And so I very much wanted to try to get as many people vaccinated as possible, or at least to your point, to give people the opportunity to become vaccinated, because as it was, we didn't have enough vaccines, right, to vaccinate any more people that wanted to become vaccinated. So we then made a decision, let's go ahead and purchase this. We knew that fellow colleagues from the region were involved. We understand how difficult it was. We confirmed that Serum was involved. We got confirmation that it would be the AstraZeneca coming from Europe, and we made the deposit. Immediately upon making the deposit, the first problem that happened, there was a significant outbreak, if you remember, in India. Mm-hmm. And AstraZeneca is a big supplier and manufacturer in India, and so the first set of doses had to go to India. Following that, there was another big outbreak in Europe, and so the Europeans put a ban and said they're not going to allow any of the doses to be exported. And there became this huge global war that was going on. So some of the delays that we were experiencing, we understood. We understood the explanation as to why they were being delayed.
But in the end, what happened to that money?
So 50% or so of the money has been reimbursed already. And as the Radical company has agreed that they're going to reimburse the remaining amount. So
any idea by when?
I'm hoping very soon. I mean, I'm not there, but I know that the current government have met with the persons from AstraZeneca. I think that the article that came out, and when I spoke to the gentleman from Radical about his lawsuit, he indicated to me the lawsuit was with an American company that had nothing to do with the deal that was being done with St. Lucia, Barbados, and Bahamas. Okay. That was a previous attempt. Now, persons asked the question, how is it that a company that's not necessarily directly involved in medication is getting involved? The owners of Radical were actually consolidating the group. So somebody had to put the money up, and somebody had to manage the whole deal because you have 3 countries involved. So it was agreed that Barbados would take the lead in dealing with AstraZeneca. And so I trust Barbados to have done their due diligence and that we were getting the right set of vaccines. And the CMOs in the region have a very close relationship. Okay? So as time went by, and I kept on meeting with the Director of Finance and with the CMO and said, should we keep holding on? So the financial situation was such that we could hold on, and we continue to hold on. And here it is that other than the COVAX that we got, and more recently the U.S. government giving some doses to everybody, nothing else has come in, right? So under those circumstances, I would have done it exactly the same. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, some people are trying to make suggestions about the relationship the gentleman had with me, business. Okay? I knew that if he did not deliver, that there was some level of recourse the government could have, because he has assets in St. Lucia and he does business in St. Lucia, versus choosing a company that has no relationship with us, and now you have to go to the international courts to attempt to get it. So I think that, one, I never hid the fact. The moment we signed the agreement, it was made public. I announced it in Parliament. I've continuously provided all of the information. The contract is there for everybody to see, and I can assure all St. Lucians there was no impropriety that was done. All the levels of due diligence, all the arms of government that needed to know, everybody was involved in making this decision. This was not a decision that the Prime Minister made exclusive about. And I want to say this, it would be impossible for the Prime Minister to have done it exclusively, because in order to get the monies to be sent to the individual, there has to be a contract, there has to be, the ministry has to commission it, so everybody was involved. I mean, I heard a particular minister say that we took the cash and sent it to the person to bypass the system. This is total lie, totally ridiculous, and this was done completely above the board in the presence of everybody, and as I said, to a contract in order to protect the people of St. Lucia.
We have a caller. We have somebody holding on for the longest while. Hello.
Yeah. Good evening, Tim.
Good evening to you, caller.
Mr. Prime Minister of the UWP, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Okay, Tim, I want to make a quick comment here. Tim, it is high time that people call and just say things that has no bearing. First, the first caller called the former Prime Minister, and he's making all kind of accusations. And he has no facts that the Prime Minister has wasted money on this project, or the former Prime Minister, has wasted money, X amount of money on that project, and it's costing the taxpayers money as a result of the former Prime Minister's carelessness. Now, you know, one thing I want to say on your program tonight. This gentleman that is sitting there with you on that program, this is a man who had a vision for St. Lucia. And this is a gentleman who knows where he wanted to bring St. Lucia in time to come. Now, the people have spoken, and in as much I am not in agreement with the result, but I accept the people have spoken. But calling the former Prime Minister and saying these kind of things, when a lot of us know that this former Prime Minister was doing everything above board and above table, that anybody can know and see what he's doing. For instance, Tim, you have Labour Party supporters, that is critics of the government. You forming a committee with these people to investigate something that you all criticize. What you think that will be the findings of this thing? You must get something wrong about the former government and the former Prime Minister, because already when things been done, you was the critic. You are the main critic of it. And right now, you are the one who is investigating. You think that is fair? You think that is right? Tim, I believe St. Lucians has to respect our former Prime Minister, because I can say for the past years in politics, Mr. Alan Michael Chastanet has been the best Prime Minister for that era. I know Sir John has done his share, but Mr. Alan Michael Chastanet, with his vision and where he was taking St. Lucia, I know for a fact. I wish that he don't call it quit, because this man has a job to complete. The mission is aborted for now, but the mission has to accomplish. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, thank you so much. Final comments from you, Mr. Leader of the Opposition.
Maybe I just want to follow up on the last caller. You know, at the end of the day, that we need to become maybe less emotional and more about an evidence-based society. I'm proud of the fact that the idea of building a new St. Lucia, I was very clear with everyone, it would take 3 years to start seeing the results. We were able to reduce taxes and grow the economy and reduce the debt. We lowered unemployment by 2019 from 25% to 16%. And I believe it had not been for COVID, with all the projects that were coming on, the airport, the road projects, that we would have seen even a further reduction in that unemployment rate. As hard as COVID has been, I think that our first 4 months, 28 cases and no deaths, speaks for itself, speaks volumes. I think that when you look at the numbers that we accomplished over 18 months, because comparisons become good. So we have now something to compare it to. The Labour Party in 100 days could not control COVID to the extent that we did for 18 months. And we had a lot less tools available to us to do so. The 100 days has taught us a lesson, that we are in for some hard times. This government is not addressing the issue. The issue is that post-COVID era is going to be very difficult. The idea that you're going to go out and bad talk and undermine and demean foreign investors in this country, that you are going to say that tourism was not making an impact and now you can come out afterwards and say, you didn't know? How could you have not known? Who doesn't know the impact of tourism in our economy? I also want to say to everyone that the intention of the United Workers' Party in the opposition is to represent the 63% of the people who either voted for us or didn't vote, and to be their voice. We will hold our head high. We will do it with the greatest amount of respect, without in any way trying to personalize the attacks on anyone, but deal with it from a factual basis. But the moment that you start seeing persons who want to make it personal attacks on us, it tells you they've already lost the argument. And it has to be about where are we going to take this country. This is, as the caller said, a problem in that it's going to slow down the progress we had. But it's for the people to make that determination, and we embrace our role as an opposition. We will do everything that we can to continue fighting for, advocating for, building a new St. Lucia. One of the things I've been doing is providing some consultancy to a group that have put together a equity fund. So they've raised so far $500 million US, and their goal is to raise $750 million US. And so one of the things I did is I had the opportunity to travel to some of the different countries in the region. So I've been to Puerto Rico, went to the USVI, I went to the Bahamas, I went to Jamaica, and I went to the Dominican Republic. And I left shocked. And I said, wow, here is that I thought that we were really pushing the needle in St. Lucia. Now, for some solutions, they are saying that we were overambitious, okay? Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at what's taking place in these other countries, and I'm saying, we're going to be left behind. And that is my difficulty with the Labour Party. What's the vision? Okay, you say you're going to put people first. Yeah? How can you put people first if you don't have a strong government? And to tell you how upset St. Lucians should be is you need to juxtapose what the first 100 days have brought and compare that to what the United Workers' Party had promised for the first 100 days, which was our 5 for 5. We promised St. Lucians that we were going to introduce health care insurance. You heard in the House yesterday that they don't know if they want to go in that direction. I know for a fact that the government cannot afford to do universal health care. Can't afford it. You know, increase in cost of operations by having now OKEU was $30 million a year. We didn't get to close Victoria. Victoria is still running and will be running for the foreseeable future as a respiratory center. When you open up St. Jude's, the cost of operating the St. Jude's in the stadium and operating it now in a modern hospital is going to go up again. Where's the money coming from? So universal health care was about co-share. That the same way you make a contribution to NIC, you'd be making a contribution for your healthcare insurance. We promised people that we'd be introducing legislation for unemployment insurance because COVID taught us a harsh lesson. If it had not been for the NIC, right, we would have not been able to provide any form of income support to anyone. We promised people that we would have e-pads for everybody, all the kids in forms 1 to form 5, and that we would have e-pads for the kids in grades 5 and 6. We talked about increasing the contribution to welfare in terms of making a contribution for people to pay rent, for people to pay their electricity bill, for people to pay their water bill, along with people, particularly elderly and the less fortunate, that they would have health insurance. These are the issues that are confronting those persons. Now, the only way that you're going to resolve that is by having more resources available to the state. The only way that you can do that is not through taxation, Tim, but it's by growing the economy. And to grow the economy requires investment. So when some people want to say, oh, you're only investing in infrastructure, well, infrastructure is what creates the capacity to grow. If you didn't build a new airport, you can't add any more hotels because the airport's already full. If you didn't build more roads, it means that people are going to be spending an inordinate amount of time going from A to B. If you don't have more pipes and distribute more water, it means you can't have more residential areas, and people are now going to continuously live in a demeaning housing development. So you have to strengthen government. To strengthen government, it means you must grow. Where is this government's plan to grow? Again, they're following the same trademark. Excuse after excuse, politics, play the blame game, this person's fault. Okay, you said you're going to put people first. We're saying that that was never your intention. The intention of the Labour Party was to put politics first. And all the evidence there is on a daily basis to remind us that's exactly what they're doing. They said they're not going to victimize people. People in my own constituency. Nobody's consulted me. Contracts have been terminated and people have been sent home. The CEO of the CIP. Look at the individuals. Ernest Hilaire's best friend is now the chairman of Invest in Lucia. His son is Ernest's attaché. Ernest's next big friend and his lawyer, Thaddeus, is the chairman of the St. Lucia Tourism Authority. And Lauren Theophilus, who is also good friends with them, all their Reds International and everything else, is now the chairman of CIP. Is it good that they're all on the same page and they're in a clique? Or is it bad? Because those were the same allegations that they made. Friends and family. Where are we going? And so there are a lot of persons in our society that are intimidated, scared to voice their concerns. And the opposition will be their voice. And I want to assure all St. Lucians that I will not be intimidated by the Labour Party. I will not be intimidated by some of my protractors who are members of the Labour Party now. And I will always represent St. Lucia with the highest level of dignity. And I will always hold myself accountable to everyone. There's no question that somebody wants to ask me that I will not be prepared to answer. And there's nothing that I don't want to be accountable to. But when a Labour Party is prepared to silence an opposition that has already only 2 voices in Parliament, this early in the game, it's frightening. So I am asking civil society to have faith in the United Workers' Party, to believe in the idea of the People's Parliament. And so those persons that came out yesterday, I want to say thank you so very much, because your presence means so much. To my constituents, I am committed to you as I've ever been before. The infrastructure that we've done in the community, the roads, the water, The community facilities, the sporting facilities are there for everyone to see. The commitment to generate jobs in the South through ITEL BPO, Ojo Labs, the new airport, and the construction that was taking place. And because of the money flowing in the South, the number of small businesses that were able to hire people, that is what United Workers' Party believes in. And let us not let the Labour Party off the hook. This is an experienced party, okay, with now 3 prime ministers as part of their team. They should have all the capacity to be able to deliver from day one. But the first 100 days has been a dismal failure. It's been one of misery and of deceit, because all of the lies, all of the tall tales now are starting to come to the forefront. And you're now going to start hearing more allegations, more extreme allegations. But I am here, I'm going nowhere, and I'll be prepared to answer all of those questions as many times as we have to. But at the same time, we're going to hold this government accountable for the promises they've made. Where's the $1,500? Where's the tax rebate? Why are you not talking about? What you're saying is, oh, the government left the coffers empty. You know the state that you left the coffers in 2016. Did you hear me complain? I understood what I was going to inherit, and we had a plan to deal with it. You ought to know what you inherited. You have people in the civil service. So nobody was hiding the numbers. You should have had a plan already to put this country back on track. So it is going to require a collective effort by all of us to hold this government accountable.
Thank you so much for being my guest on this evening's Newsmaker Live, former Prime Minister, Leader of the Parliamentary Opposition, Mr. Alan Chastanet. And to you, as always, thank you so much for watching. If it's Wednesday, it's Newsmaker Live. Do not forget that Newspin is very much on. We have a Newspin Facebook page as well. We are on Power 97.9 FM. That is Power 97.9 FM, as well as www.power979.com. My name is Timothy Paul. Your time now for the clip that peaked.
Hello?
Hello.
You remember when you wanted me, I didn't wanted you because I wanted someone else who wanted me.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Now they don't wanted me anymore. Do you still wanted me? Because I'm available now.
No, they took to me.
Thank you so much for watching. Here's to a very good evening. Don't forget to join me tomorrow afternoon, once again, 12:30 for Newspin on the Newspin Facebook page, as well as Power 97.9 FM. Good night.